Hey guys, I'm glad I'm here to share you with my literature research project. My project mainly contains two novels, Jane Eyre and Frankenstein. At the beginning, I just considered Jane Eyre was a very classical representative of feminism novels. But later I found that there were also many feminist elements in the scientific novel Frankenstein, and the expression of these elements were quite different from those in Jane Eyre. So I choose to compare the two novels instead of discussing a single one. Also, these two novels are both written by famous female authors in the Victorian era, so they are very comparative. After listening to my presentation, I hope you could understand the different methods Mary Shelley and Charlotte Brown are using, and I wish I could provide you a new perspective of looking at feminism. My presentation could be mainly discussed and divided into these four parts: introduction, novel framework, character poetry, and writing technique. So let's first begin with the introduction part. In the Victorian era, when the patriarchal society was still the mainstream culture, women possessed very low status in society. Some advanced women who received a good education found the literary area was a good breakthrough to fight against the oppression of patriarchal system, in where they could let out their emotions freely and ask for equality in an obscure way. Charlotte Brown and Mary Shelley are the outstanding representative of this advanced woman who managed to create two outstanding literature works, Frankenstein and Jane Eyre, in a male-dominated field of writing. Through detailed comparison and contrast of these two novels, I found these two novels mainly differ in three aspects. That is, article framework, character poetry, writing techniques. Also, some similarities still can be found, and I will discuss them carefully later. In fact, advocating feminist ideas is not the main melody of these two novels, but in both novels there hides certain discussion of the status and role of women in the Victorian era. By combining the author's life experience and historical background, we were able to infer the writing intention and artistic expression effect of these two novels. Generally speaking, my research project is aiming to tell you, in terms of solving the woman question, Charlotte Brown and Mary Shelley respectively put forward different solutions or warnings by subtle means through their own unique writing techniques, so as to assist a woman to establish stronger independent consciousness and self-identity. Instead of conveying feminist ideas from the perspective of the traditional antagonism between men and women, these two novels propagate the idea that men and women are actually interdependent. Now let's look at the first differences, novel framework. As two novels with complete different themes, Frankenstein can be regarded as the frontier text of science fiction, while Jane Eyre is more like an autobiographical novel. But both Mary Shelley and Charlotte Brown managed to create their works under the framework of classical literature works in the past, which could help endow deeper metaphor meanings to the images in the novels. Frankenstein was built based on the Paradise Lost, while Jane Eyre was created on the framework of the Divine Comedy. A number of experts have discovered that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was heavily influenced by the book Paradise Lost. Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gilbert, who were the famous critics of feminism, believed that Frankenstein told a hellish story that described the heaven as hell and intimidated the male world as a horrible female world. This was reasonable, and the evidence could be found from Mary Shelley's real-life experience and also inside the novel Frankenstein. First, Mary Shelley lost her mom when she was very young, and her marriage with Percy Shelley also went badly. Shelley has experienced many times of pregnancy and many times of loss of children during that period, which left a deep psychological shelter inside Mary Shelley's heart. And she began to get tired of the phenomenon of reproduction. Therefore, it can be inferred that, due to Mary's real-life experience, she deliberately skipped the process of female reproduction when creating the monster in her novel. This is similar to the male-dominated situation in the Paradise Lost. Second, in terms of content, the expression and the metaphor of Paradise Lost in Frankenstein are more evident. On the one hand, the monster once picked up the book Paradise Lost, which is the primary book for it. On the other hand, the duality of Victor's image was another powerful proof. Both like the God who created the monster and like the Satan who abandoned the monster. Also, the image of Eve seemed to be deliberately excluded, which reflected Mary's desire of showing the awakening process of female sexual consciousness in a male-dominated society. On the contrary, Charlotte Brown's Jane Eyre detailed recorded the growth and experience of the protagonist, Jane Eyre, which framework possesses certain similarities with the book The Divine Comedy. At the very beginning, the orphan Jane Eyre was in the hell stage by receiving maltreatment from Miss Reed in Gateshead and experiencing discrimination in Load. Later, Jane Eyre came to Sunfield as a governess, in where she fell in love with Rochester, but finally she put her love second to the knowledge that he cannot remain with Rochester due to the existence of Percy Mason. This was the stage when Jane Eyre's spirit was purified and perfected. In the last period, Jane Eyre eventually forgave Miss Reed and returned back to the disabled Rochester after vagrancy, which was the time she reached the ideal haven and mental maturity. Charlotte Brown's choice of the structure of from nothing to something not only could show her pursuit of femininity intuitively, but also could bring audience a deep sense of immersion in order to encourage women in the Victorian era to get rid of stereotype. Second, let's look at how Mary Shelley and Charlotte Brown differ in their character poetry. Mary Shelley and Charlotte Brown created a similar mad character in their novel, that is the monster in Frankenstein and Percy Mason in Jane Eyre. In Jane Eyre, Percy Mason's madness and isolation were an illustration of the low status of women in the patriarchal world. Percy's father was interested in Rochester's social status as a noble family, while Rochester was interested in Percy's £30,000 dowry. Percy, the unfortunate woman who had no right to dispose of her own marriage, eventually became the victim of this transaction. In addition, some critics regarded Percy as an expression of Jane Eyre's unconscious emotions because her rage against the gender prejudice and the patriarchal system cannot be conveyed by herself. Jane Eyre lived in a realistic world, which meant her resistance against the traditional unequal concept could not only be expressed within the range allowed by laws and morality. Thus, the more violent part of his range needed to be done by Percy Mason, the mad woman who has no limits. A similar madness also occurs with the monster in Frankenstein. From a symbolic point of view, the monster was essentially a woman driven mad by patriarchal system, and it killed almost all of the relatives and friends of Victor after going through numerous setbacks, just like Percy Mason. The monster's madness was caused by several factors. First, the monster was not only abandoned by his father, Victor, but also was divided into an alien category of the entire human world. After acquiring language, the monster began to possess human mind, which accelerated the monster to become more aware of its alien identity. Second, after browsing the whole novel, it can be found that this creature was always called a monster without a specific name, which made the monster fail in identity construction and social relationship building. Name represents a person's power code and simple reference, and the absence of name is one of the obvious signals of the oppression comes from the mainstream patriarchal culture to monsters led by Victor. The monster always acted the role of invisible people in human society, just as a reality that women occupied a low status in the patriarchal dominant society during the Victorian era. In short, the monster's tragic life actually is the mystery of marginalized women in a patriarchal society. Finally, I'm going to analyze how Mary Shelley and Charlotte Bronte differ in their writing techniques. Jane Eyre was depicted as a very positive female image with independent and aggressive traits, and a great deal of novel length was devoted to her psychological narration process. But in contrast, Mary Shelley put little effort on poetry in the female roles, and they all existed to serve as a foil to the male characters. As an autobiographical novel, Charlotte Bronte's poetry of Jane Eyre not only integrated her own shadow, but also reflected her expectation for the performance of Victorian women. In the previous, the heroines in love stories were usually beautiful and gentle, while Jane Eyre is poor and obscure. Under these circumstances, Jane Eyre still tried to launch resistance in the difficulties, pursuing the economic independence by becoming governess, and ask for equality in love relationship with Rochester. Without doubt, female images in literary works has always been described as weak and passive, and females were usually arranged to be rescued by and protected by males. However, the relationship between Jane Eyre and Rochester broke the tradition of the hero save the beauty between the plain work, because the plain-looking Jane Eyre reversed to become a saver of Rochester. The first rescue happened in a night when Percy Mason burned the house. Jane Eyre woke up the sleeping Rochester and saved him. Later, the second rescue referred to that Jane Eyre eventually returned back to the disabled Rochester and helped him recover. Over and over again, Jane Eyre acted the hero role, which was not in accord with the traditional female images. This kind of arrangement in Jane Eyre put female into an active position, which effectively shook the patriarchal system dominant in the society. In contrast, Mary Shelley did not portray the female characters as positive as Bronte do, and even put them in a very passive position. You see that Elizabeth, Justine, Margaret, Agatha, and Sapphi, they all very beautiful, gentle, and selfless comforters and dedicators of their families without any inner conflicts or desires, which are consistent with the definition of woman recognized by the society at that time. Margaret, for example, acted as the recipient of Welton's letters, and Elizabeth was viewed as a possession of Victor. Even Sapphi, the only woman who had a self-statement section, was also considered a failed to break the patriarchal system. Nevertheless, this kind of demeaning description of female characters was actually Mary Shelley's powerful weapon of fighting against the patriarchal system. The existence of women can have a great influence on the formation of male characters. For instance, Welton admitted in a letter that he has greatly influenced by Margaret's gentle and feminine fosterage. Thus, under the circumstances, he finally turned the ship around because of feeling responsible for his crew. Moreover, the absence of female role in the birth of the monster also resulted in a tragical results. Therefore, although Mary Shelley portrayed a series of negative female characters, her purpose was obviously not to belittle women, but to illustrate the importance of women's function by means of irony. To sum up, Shelley Brown directly questioned the specific social roles of women given by stereotypes in her novel, but Mary Shelley discussed around the interaction between feminine functions and male moralities to demonstrate the indispensable position of women. Last but not least, I like to make a conclusion for my research project. In terms of time, Frankenstein was published a little earlier than Jane Eyre. Therefore, we have the reason to speculate that Mary Shelley's vague expression of feminism is a compromise of the situation that early female writers tried to get rid of the shadow of male-dominated culture, but temporarily unable to build women's discourse power. If Jane Eyre is an instruction book written specifically for female readers in order to encourage them to pursue new lives, then Frankenstein could be seen as a warning to male readers that reminds the serious consequences of neglecting female functions. And from Mary Shelley to Shelley Brown, female writers in the Victorian era have been searching for the most suitable outlaws of advocating feminism. The excessive separation of male and female identities has been proved to have potential dangers. So violence was not the best solution, obviously. Mary Shelley and Shelley Brown have provided us with a new perspective to deal with feminism. That is, by promoting the idea that men and women are actually interdependent. But its development still needs constant reflection, improvement, and explorations. Finally, thank you for listening and thank you for your patience. I hope my presentation could give you a new perspective of looking at feminism. Thank you, and that's all. Bye.